right. Thank you, everybody, for joining again on another episode of the Bow Body Show. I'm your host, Ricky Rains. There's not really any kind of like crazy news or anything going on so far. So it's kind of just like a rejoining of the minds to talk about this renovations thing that has popped up. The Panthers have went ahead and gotten approval to do the stadium renovations to Bank of America Stadium. It's not cheap. It's relatively expensive. Luckily, we have the tourist funds and we have a very, very wealthy owner. But the opinions on this whole thing are pretty split. So instead of me just kind of giving what I think about all of this and regurgitating my thoughts on the Carolina Panthers and their offseason so far and where they stand going into the offseason, thought it would be a good idea to bring in somebody much smarter than me, much more informed than me. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and bring up our guest today, Miss Sheena Quick. Sheena, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining us. I apologize for having the schedule difficulties that I have run into multiple times trying to get you on here. But I really do appreciate you taking some time and joining us. Let's start with it. The stadium renovations is a relatively polarizing topic because everyone is aware that David Tepper is worth $20 billion, right? And
Right.
it is also no secret that the Rock Hill situation didn't exactly go super well. The Eastland site did not go over extremely well. And the Carolina Panthers, I don't think this is news to anyone that's watching this show, but the Panthers have not been a very good football team since David Tepper bought the franchise. Just your initial read. What do you think of everything that has been made of the renovations and Tepper's involvement in all of this?
They definitely needed a facelift. Bank of America Stadium has, I think they got a D or F in the facilities ranking that the NFLPA did. They definitely were due for a facelift. I know that you and I both know that winning cures everything. So if this team were a little bit better, we wouldn't even be having a slick discussion on whether or not David Tepper should be funding this with his own money. I'm of the notion, it is my personal belief, I just don't think that Rock Hill thing was on him. I don't think the onus was all on him. I think that, the city of Rock Hill reneged on parts of the agreement and expected him, since he's a billionaire, to just go ahead and foot the bill, and he did not do that. So I do think that he gets a bad rap for that, and I don't necessarily think that's entirely his fault. But again, if the team were better, he wouldn't, be such a polarizing figure, and we wouldn't have so many split decisions amongst the fans and the league as a whole when it comes to him and his involvement and what he's doing with this team.
Because there has become like this like almost national persona, right? That he's built for himself as like a villain. And I think that you make a really good point there, though, with the Rock Hill thing. That's a two-sided venture, right? They were supposed to put up their ends with the bonds, secured money, and they did not do what they, or from my understanding, at least, they didn't do exactly what they had agreed upon doing. And Tepper is used to being a really smart dude in a room. Yeah, he's a businessman, right? Like that's how he became a billionaire. So he's very used to being the smartest guy in the room when it comes to business. So he wasn't going to get put over by Rock Hill, South Carolina, right? Like he's a northern transplant. He's from Pennsylvania. I'm sure he doesn't want to be the guy that got tricked by the Blumpkins in South Carolina, right? But so the stadium, though, the thing I think that people are very confused about with the stadium renovations as opposed to building a new one, and I don't know if you have any insight in this, but from the Charlotte City Council meeting the other day, they talked about the 15-year tether as opposed to the 30-year tether, right? Because we've seen other examples. I believe it was Jacksonville that just finished their proposal, which is also being split with the city and their owner. But they have a 30-year tether on there. They're building a dome on top of it. It sounds like a little bit more extensive work being done than what the Panthers are doing. Is it your understanding that this is kind of look, we want to upgrade and make these facilities up to league standard, make them enjoyable for fans, people that are paying their good money for these seats and these events that they're going to, but we are still looking at the main goal of building a new stadium in the near future?
I think so. I think they didn't want to pigeonhole themselves into having to do one thing or the other.
Mm.
I would have been, and they also want to be able to host things like the draft and the Super Bowl. If you've been to a Panthers game anytime recently, you know that those facilities are just not up to par for either of those events. Yeah, sure, they're
Right.
holding concerts and everything else, but we're talking specifically about football and the Panthers.
Right. So the interesting thing, and I'll put up this quote. This is from Council Member Brown. This was one of my favorite parts of the entire meeting, which I thought it was great too. That like Panthers Twitter and everybody was watching this as if it was like an event, like it was a football game, right? Like
Right.
it was
Like
it
it
was
was
a
the
watch
draft
party.
almost.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, it
right.
was a watch party.
It was fun, man, and that's one of my favorite things about like the internet fan base of the Panthers is that it is a collective. Any small thing, they
Oh,
will
yeah.
ride together on it. But this was my favorite
Listen,
quote from
I
that
know.
meeting. Yeah. Council member Tijuana Brown said, "It sounds real good until we get Mr. Tepper angry, and then he might throw something at the city council. The behavior of someone asking for $650 million is ridiculous." I don't want to overblow like the behaviors of David Tepper. I'm not a huge fan of his personal behaviors. I think that some of it he's brought onto himself. But also, is this a petty thing to kind of bring up the drink throw when it's a matter of
Absolutely.
funds that have been allocated to tourism, right? Like these funds are already put
Yeah.
away somewhere. They're not actively asking the citizens of Charlotte
To
to keep
raise that
paying for it.
money. Yeah.
Correct. Yes. So does this seem a little bit like almost, I don't want to say smear campaign because that's probably the wrong terminology, but it's like
I
evoking
get what
emotion.
you're saying. I think so too. I think that you got to take the emotions out of things, and he got really hot
Yeah.
headed. We initially everyone saw that video; it went viral, it went everywhere. But then you learned the backstory, and that this particular fan was making a really distasteful joke about Marquise Haynes, who had just left the game with a concussion, and we all know how dangerous those head injuries may be. I'm not
Mm,
okaying it at all because as a owner in the NFL, you're held to a higher standard of conduct,
right.
and he got swept up in the moment. But I don't think it's fair to bring that up when it comes to building a stadium
Right.
or I'm sorry,
Okay.
or
Well,
renovating the stadium. I just didn't think that's apples and oranges to me.
yeah, and it does also paint the picture for Tepper, and hopefully we can kind of transition this into the team now. Hopefully he's
Mhm.
understanding too that all of these actions that he does, no matter if it's small or a joking manner, whatever it is that he thinks
Yeah,
he's doing, it's going to have some
like with
sort of
the
ramification.
like with the hat.
Yeah, the hat, right? Like, look, I don't
Yeah.
know, man. That hat thing, it didn't really like bother me that bad, but at the same time, like, do you really touch somebody's hat like that, right?
So here's the thing, and I got a little bit of the backstory on that from Nicole Tepper and
Uh,
Bryce Young, who she said that she's coming on Quick Blitz. So if we're able to swing that and get her on there, that would be huge because I do think that fans need to hear from the Teppers and hear from their perspective. I'm not saying that he has to hold a town council meeting or town hall or come into
yeah,
Panther spaces and defend himself. I'm not saying those things at all, but the only times we necessarily hear from David Tepper is when he's fired someone. And even
right.
those interactions are very limited in scope. So she said that she was actually the one they were driving by and they saw the sign. She was like, "Oh, look at that!" And they were laughing and joking about it. She was like, "Oh, you should go in there." So they pull over. He goes in, and you get the surveillance, but clearly from the body language of both him and the I don't know if it was the manager or the man whose hat he took off. They were clearly in a jovial banter back and forth. It wasn't like,
Right.
"Oh my God, you touched my hat. I feel disrespected." But
Yeah.
again, coupled with the past and coupled with where the team is, people are going to jump to the worst conclusion possible when it comes to him, especially fresh off of the cup throw. Fresh off of the cup
I think
throw, fresh off of the Reich hire, the Steve Wilkes non-hire,
yeah.
the Matt Rule hire, like all those things kind of piece together to give you guys, or not you guys, but fans in general, this
Yeah.
particular perception of this tyrannical NFL owner who has no couth, who has no who's too proud to humble himself and say, "Hey, I
Yeah.
need to back away." Like there's just so much stuff that rolled into that I do think that if she is able to come on to that podcast, I think it could really, really offer some insight as to what the hell is going on with this franchise.
I think it'd be perfect because you're right. All we have is what we can go off of with like public knowledge, right? And
Very,
most of the
very
times,
limited, very limited.
and the only time that an NFL owner is usually ever involved in like the news or anything like that is for bad news. It's not because of what
When
they
you're
are.
firing, when you're
Yeah,
firing a
yeah,
coach, when you're introducing the new one, when you're justifying why Cam Newton was like just different things like that. It's
right,
never when the team is winning, then you hear like how many times did you hear specifically personally from Jerry Richardson?
right. Not often.
I
Not
could get
often.
on
But
an
when
elevator
was the
with
big
Jerry
time that we heard
Richardson.
about Jerry Richardson? It's when he was in the middle of a scandal and was getting removed from his position, right?
Exactly. So
Yeah,
that's why I think you, and again, this fan base is, they're, they're easily triggered because this team has been trash for like the
yeah,
last 5 years or so. And so when you have things like that happening, like if that team last year was able to even have a microcosm of improvement and been in play for the NFC South, I think that the image of David Tepper, I'm not going to say it would have been completely scrubbed clean, but it would have
right.
been on the mend. Instead, they're all these super coaches that you brought in just for the team to suck on
Mm,
offense. You know, the trade up for Bryce Young, they're saying that Nicole Tepper picked the quarterback, and why is she picking? She's not Leanne Tui. She knows nothing about football or the blind side. So
right.
you get all of these different narratives when the team is just bad.
Yeah. And
That's just
and
kind of
the
what we've been dealing with here.
and if they'd have had the success like you're talking about, then some of those comments from Tepper where he's talking about football, talking about the operations, talking about Bryce Young being a point guard and all those things, if any
Those
of
would have
it
been
came
better
into
received.
yeah, if it came into any kind of fruition, right? Like even a
Yeah.
small little semblance of it, people would have been like, "Hey, look, maybe Tepper picked up on a little bit of football knowledge when he's been around people over his time." But instead,
Well,
it just feels
it's
again like
been,
that
yeah,
pattern of interjecting himself where
control.
maybe he should yeah, yeah, like just not being able to let go of it. Okay. Look, I don't want to
I
spend
think
the
that
entire
he
time.
is though.
What did you say?
I do think that this year he is. I think that we've seen some of the smarter football moves in this offseason, and it's only June, than we've seen in several years, several seasons. Definitely since he, became the owner. I think we're seeing a lot of football conscious moves. And to me, I feel like that is a sign of him backing away. That
So you
is a
think that's
sign of him
genuine?
saying, "Hey, I do. I do think it's genuine. How long will it stay that way? That's the question.
Because
How
you know
long
a
will
lot
it
of
stay
fans
that
saw
way?"
a lot of fans saw the Blueprint episode, right? Where it looked like
Mhm.
Morgan was talking to David Tepper about what to do about the trade and who to pick and all that. But there's a little bit of context to it. The head coach, Dave Canales, was sitting directly behind David Tepper, right? He very
David
easily,
Tepper.
right.
So
And
I
he's
mean,
David Tepper.
anyone
Like
can
he still
easily
owns the team.
manipulate anything. All you need to
Yeah.
do is angles. Angles are everything. Because if you
Yeah.
didn't know that Dave Canales was sitting right behind David Tepper, you're like, oh shoot, here we go again.
Yeah.
I just don't get yes man vibes from Dan Morgan at all. At all. He's one of the few people, if not the only person in that front office that's been part of a winning season with Carolina. There's not a lot of people with a history of knowing what keep pounding actually meant or being a part of a team of organization that actually was in play for the postseason or
Yeah.
wasn't finishing under 500 every year. He's one of the few people with that experience, and I think that we're seeing that. I think that they executed that draft the best they could. They went into
Yeah.
this thing 2-15, coming off 2-15. No first round pick. Like there was nothing in sight. Like Brian Burns was gone. You didn't get a first
Right.
for him after not getting a first for Christian McCaffrey. After the DJ Moore trade, you lost 5 starters on the defensive side of the ball, which was the only positive unit on that entire team last year. And so it definitely looked gloomy and spooky. But I feel like Panthers fans came out of the draft with a little bit of hope because that draft fell the best way it possibly could have for the Panthers.
Mm.
And I know they had their willing and dealing. Dan Morgan was able to get some draft compensation back
Yeah.
that had been traded away prior to his tenure. I think they got a steal of the draft with Jonathan Brooks and Jatavion Sanders. I think Xavier Leggett is going to be very good in this league for a long time. So I do think that they played the hand that they were dealt as best they could. Again,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say everyone, but you have a fan base that's split on keeping Brian Burns because he's a 25-year-old edge rusher, multiple
Hmm.
Pro Bowler. They're not looking at the 8 sacks. They're not looking
Right.
at the 8 sacks because at the end of the day, the Panthers were never leading in any of those games. So all the teams were doing was running the ball. There's not a lot of
Right.
opportunities for sacks when you're just handing the ball off and running the clock. But if you're just
Right.
a stat watcher and, as they like to say, a casual fan, it looks like Brian Burns had an off year or took a season off when he
Right.
really played and put himself at risk of getting hurt before getting a
Yeah.
new contract. So by the time Canales and Morgan came in, the Brian Burns contract issue had been an issue from Matt Rule and Scott Fitterer to Frank
Yep.
Reich and Scott Fitterer to now. Like they never had the ability or the option of focusing solely on getting people paid because they spent the last 3 off seasons hiring coaches.
Right. No, that's a good point,
The
though.
last
Like,
two,
honestly, when you've got a laundry list of things to do, it's really hard to decipher which one you should start with when they all kind of have the same pressing like topic of it, right? Like we need to get to every single one of these if we want to turn this into a winning operation, but you can't do 6
right,
things at once. So you got to pick and choose.
exactly.
When you bring up the draft, and I appreciate the perspective there about Dan Morgan, because look, I was a little bit skeptical about keeping Dan Morgan as the AGM to Fitterer. It was kind of that notion, and a lot of fans felt this way of, man, if
Yeah,
he's such a stand up guy who's going to bang the table and go against the grain, right? Why didn't he do it? But it's also the job hierarchy. When you're not the boss, you still have to answer to
because we
somebody.
don't know. We don't know
Correct.
how his opinion was weighed. There were a lot of
Right.
opinions in that room because on top of him, you also had Dom Capers and Jim Caldwell, whose opinions are very, very highly regarded.
Right.
And,
Right.
and not to mention the coordinators.
Those are senior
And
football minds that are involved and that are getting paid. And we know Jim Caldwell. We don't know the specifics. And that tells you all you need to know about how much Jim Caldwell is making because he's just getting a bag. Like they didn't tell you what it was. They didn't tell you how much was in it. But they said, hey, he's going to come and do something that he said he wasn't going to do again. So they paid him.
You had to coax him out with the bag. And that's the thing about it. Like you said, he was the assistant GM. So whether or not he agreed with decisions or not, if Fitterer wanted to do what he wanted to do, that's it. He's the assistant. So I've always liked Dan Morgan as a player, and I think he's going to be a really good executive in this league. If these early signs in these last couple of months are any indication of that.
How about Brant Tillis? How important was that addition to this front office?
The money man.
Yeah.
The Panthers had been fleeced for so much money over the last couple of seasons. Like somebody had to come in there. At one point in time, this team was paying Cam Newton's replacement in Teddy Bridgewater.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next year you trade for Sam Darnold. But you're still paying Teddy.
Yeah.
So then you're paying Cam Newton's replacement, replacement. Then you have to go back and get Cam Newton again. There were 3 quarterbacks, like they were paying all of them at one time. So clearly, it's not monopoly money. Somebody had to come in there because I don't know how, well, other than David Tepper having money, like I think the salary cap thing is a myth because somehow the Saints managed to magic and get up under the cap every single year. So I don't even think that's real. I think it's definitely a myth. I don't know how they do that.
The Saints somehow found the audacity. The Saints somehow found the audacity to go and give a guy like Derek Carr almost $300 million when they were like $100 million over the cap.
I'm telling you, like,
it don't make no sense.
It doesn't make any sense. I'm telling you, it's definitely a myth. I don't know who's over there doing the doing what they need to do to make some shake. But I mean, just what I highlighted just to that quarterback position. Then you go and you pay Ian Thomas as a top half, one of the top, I guess, 16 or top half tight ends in the league, and the stats just don't justify that. Right. The production in that group just has not been there. It's been abysmal. So there's been a lot of money mistakes made with this team. I mean, some people will call Miles Sanders' contract a mistake. I think it's too early to do that, but some people would say that, and so
that's what I was going to ask you.
Important. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say.
It's important for them to get a money man in there.
Yeah, because and it's from a winning program too, right? It's the Kansas City Chiefs. So like if you got to take somebody from an organization, you want to take somebody from an organization that has proven that they can win if they do things in a smart way. And I mean, he was the mastermind of the Patrick Mahomes contract, which at the time when it dropped, everyone thought it was crazy. But now it's like this really smart, team-friendly bargain that they can continue to work on year after year. So when we look at this team now, and you bring up Miles Sanders, you bring up Ian Thomas, and I think that's a good segue into what Canales and Dan Morgan have built with this team. What are we supposed to be looking at the closest when it comes to training camp? Like from a fan's perspective, what are the competitions that could really make some waves, because Miles Sanders is a name that has been brought up multiple times as, look, he underperformed last year. He was hurt as well. The offensive line was abysmal. I think that's the nicest way that I could put that. And the
It is.
scheme, I mean, I just read the Jonathan Jones story today on CBS Sports, and he was talking about how Thomas Brown put that offense together in the offseason, and then Frank Reich, right before the season, took over and decided he wanted to do it his way. That doesn't sound
That's what I'm
super
saying.
conducive.
It
Yeah,
does
that doesn't
not.
sound
And I
smart,
mean,
right?
and you hear so many people say it without really saying it, because I will say the Panthers players do have a good history of being very well media trained as far as
Mm,
not throwing people under the bus when it comes to that. Very
mhm.
team friendly guys in that sense. But the sentiment that's been echoed is that there are not going to be a lot of voices in Bryce Young's ear.
Yeah.
That statement alone should tell you everything you need to know. It should tell you this
Mm,
person's telling him to do this, and then you're in the headphones telling him to do. So now you have Bryce out here doing the cha-cha slide, looking incompetent because he doesn't know who he's listening to.
right.
But I've always
Right.
said that, like that team, last year was just. I felt like everybody was just trying to CYA once it went off the
Mhm.
rails. But even before that, they were trying to force schemes that they just did not have the personnel for.
Right.
Bryce, not Bryce. I'm sorry. Miles Sanders is not a power back. He's a
Right.
finesser. He's a finesse. You have to set that edge and let him bounce to the edge and get downfield. That's what he gives you. Chuba is a bit more of a grinder, but the
Mhm.
Panthers didn't commit. They wouldn't commit to running the ball when it was determined that those wide receivers weren't getting open. It just was
Right.
what it was. And then you don't have a line that's built to pass protect. You have a line that's built. You have a line of maulers that's built to run the ball. And for whatever
Yeah.
reason, Frank Wright was dead set on not being a smash mouth football team, even though that could have won them a few more games last year had he been more open and receptive to playing to the strengths of his players. And I think that that's where Dave Canales comes in. A lot of people look at Tampa last year and they're like, okay, he's not a superstar offensive play caller because they only finished it. Da, 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 da. But I will say this: I felt like that Tampa team exceeded expectations for sure.
Y- Absolutely.
I,
Yeah. Look,
it definitely exceeded
they have Mike
expectations.
Evans and Chris Godwin. Those are the big names, right? But Baker Mayfield is
Yeah.
coming off of seasons after seasons of disappointing or underperforming and not living up to that billing of the number one overall pick as well. So it's got to be like a little bit hope inspiring for Panthers fans to have seen that offensive production that they got out of that offense that year, with the first year of that scheme being put in place. A lot of new guys in new places. They moved Tristan Wirfs over to left tackle. That has to kind of ring a little bit of optimism for Icky as well at left tackle. I remember the interaction that you had with Icky. I believe it was you that asked the question at the end of OTAs about his year, and he struggled, and did he kind of like understand
Mhm.
the gripes that fans had? And he spilled the beans on himself that he didn't really prepare the way that he should have for his sophomore season. Do you get the
Yeah.
sense that he's taking everything really seriously this year and that this scheme is built better for him?
Of course, like he has to. There's
Yeah.
no other way. I actually asked him the night that he was drafted. I said, you do realize that when a tackle is taken as early as you've been taken, that you're expected to change the franchise." He said he
Mhm.
was up to it, and we saw him have an impressive rookie season, especially later in the season. So Panthers fans were really, really excited. They're thinking, okay, you know what? Offensive line is set. We brought back the guys that we had success with. Let's go. Now we're going to add Miles Sanders. That's considered an upgrade at that position. We're adding DJ Chark since we lost DJ Moore. We're adding Hayden Hurst, who's going to
Mhm.
revamp that tight end room. But it starts at the offensive line. If Bryce doesn't have time to do
Right.
anything, none of these plays get to formulate or even materialize. And so again, that sudden scheme change jarred him. And he still was a
Mhm.
very young player. And I remember Michael Lombardi, even before the season started, I was like, man, he is cooking Frank Reich on his
Yeah.
podcast. But he said everywhere that Frank goes, the offensive line regresses. And what did we see?
Mm. Mm.
He said that everything that he said would happen happened.
Happened.
He said that
Oh.
Frank, he was like, oh, he's never won a season opener as a head coach. And I was like, dang, man, come true.
You
And
think Mike Lombardi would be willing to give a couple of lottery numbers for by chance? Because it
listen,
sounds
I
like
don't
he's
know, but
got that magic ball.
he clocked T on Frank Reich for sure. He definitely clocked that T. And then
Mm.
as the season went on, I kept remembering that particular podcast episode. And I'm like, He did say that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so when you have a young player like that, you have an offensive overhaul, you have all these different changes that take place, not to mention, in the middle of his rookie season, Matt Rule got fired. So
Right.
now you're on your third. Well, they kept Ben McAdoo, so he was only on his second play caller, and you retained, the guys that you'd had success with. You retained James Camp because he got a lot out of that line. You retained Chris Tabor; he was good with the special. Like you retained all of these different people, but you just didn't get the production because when it comes down to it, you have to call the plays and the schemes, and you have to work with what you have. You can
Yeah.
say what you would like to have. That's cool. You might want to implement this scheme over seasons as you're able to flip that roster, but you have to play with what you have, and they just didn't do a good job of that. And Icky was one of the glaring problems because we had not seen a regression that bad, especially from a draft pick
Right.
that high. He looked like a fish out of water so often, but he did say that he's using his resources. A lot of fans were kind of pissed with that response. They're like, "Oh, he
Yeah.
was just riding the coattails of his rookie season." This is a young player.
Yeah.
He's still a very young player. A lot of people wanted him to slide to guard. He does not have the speed for that. It was a reason that they left him where he was. They did not want him moving closer to the ball. They didn't feel like that was the answer. And with Canales, we've heard it all this offseason. He's committing to running the ball. He said himself, we look at Icky's tape and where Icky succeeds, he's a mauler. That's what we want him to do. We want to establish a run attack. You brought back Chuba Hubbard. Brooks, I don't know how long he's going to be out or when he's going to be available. But that running backs room, and just to go back to your original question, as far as training camp, that running backs room is pretty crowded. It's going
It
to be
is.
interesting to see how that shakes out.
Are they serious about
Very
Rashad Penny, or was that just like a hey, look, we have familiarity with him and he can help with like some of the verbiage and communication early on in camps? Or are they pretty serious about trying to give him a chance at making the roster?
I think they're serious about giving everybody in that running backs room a chance to make the roster. I mean, when you're 2-15, you have to look at everything. You don't know
Sure.
who's going to have a standout season, and you're just hoping that he's on the active roster for your team if and when he does have that standout
Right.
season. So I do think that they're willing to explore any option because I'm not going to say it can't get worse than 2-15 because 0-17
Because it
definitely
can.
stinks and could
Yeah.
have been on the
Yeah.
horizon last year. Could have been on the
Yeah.
horizon last year, but I do think that they're not in a position to pick and choose right now. They have to do what's best and what fits and which personnel groupings work the best for this team to get some W's.
It was interesting that you brought up Icky not being able to slide inside because of the speed. And I assume you're meaning like being able to get out in space and on pools and things of that nature. But
Yes.
if what we're looking at now with the offensive line, I love the additions of the guards, right? They put a bunch of money into that, allocated a bunch of funds in free agency. But Brady or Austin Corbett is now our starting center, and he's never taken a single snap at the position in the NFL, like in a meaningful game. Never has.
Right.
He's coming off of 2 significant leg injuries. This last year, though, was a little bit less significant. It was kind of, to me, it seemed like he just never was 100% and maybe went out there and was on a little bit early, trying to push it, get out there and play with his team. But he just seemed like he re-injured or injured that leg, compensating for that previous injury. I've seen reports, and I think that you said it, and I think it was even Mike Kay. A number of reporters who've been at these camps have said Austin looks really good and he's moving. Is he kind of turning heads and saying that he might
I
be an
mean,
answer there at the
he's
center?
blocking downfield, doing all of those things.
Mm,
And he was one of the players that we did get to talk to during I don't know if it was during voluntary OTAs. Either way, we've talked to him, this off season, and he said that his coaches had always told him, "You're going to play center in the NFL
mm,
to some degree."
wow.
So he does have experience at that position and knew that it would be in his future at some point. He might not have known that it was going to be this year, and I think it's too early to say he looks good at center, but he is
Sure.
moving very well. He's getting down the field. He's showing some speed. He's downfield blocking. I was like, wait a minute, is this awesome? Let me check my roster. Okay, and that's really promising for him coming off of,
It
like you
is.
said, those 2 injuries that ended his season, the last 2 seasons. But Brady Christensen has also been getting some snaps at center also. But I do think that Austin, as time goes on and he gets more reps and gets more comfortable, it's not as much of a fish out of water as it may seem to us
Yeah.
initially, because we were like, wait a minute. So hearing his perspective and hearing his history of preparing for the position and what coaches have felt like he could do gives me a little bit more confidence going into the season
Sure.
with him there.
Makes you feel a little bit more comfortable, at least, like you're not like entirely
Like,
exposed because you spent all this money on the
right.
interior, and then you just kind of plug and play, put a guy in there that hasn't done it. Um, Now, the guy that
Yeah.
they're protecting, Bryce Young, I've got to ask you about it before we start to wrap up here. We got to talk about Bryce because one of my gripes that I've had so much this offseason is some of these rankings. So I want to get your opinion on just like, do you think that all of this has been earned because of one awful rookie season with all of the context and stuff that surrounds that rookie season to be calling Bryce, the 34th or the 40th ranked quarterback in the NFL? That seems a little bit clickbaity to me because you're talking about
It's
him not even
definitely
being worthy
clickbait.
of being a starter if he's ranked in those positions. You're talking about him being
Right.
behind a guy like Sam Darnold, behind all of the rookie quarterbacks.
Behind
Doesn't
rookies
make
that
any
have never
sense to me.
snap a football in the NFL, which I think is
Never
just
taken a snap.
insane. I think that's the Carolina effect.
Ah,
That's the Carolina effect. These teams win, and Bryce has to come out and ball out because they did
yeah,
give up a lot for him. It's not like they had the number one pick already, and he was
right.
the other quarterbacks were trash. It does not help that C.J. Stroud had an amazingly phenomenal rookie
Just
season and was
ridiculous. Yeah,
they're going to always be linked.
yep,
The two of them and Anthony Richardson, they're going to always be linked. They're going to always be what ifs. I do think it was noteworthy to know that Bryce missed the fewest amount of games out of the three of them, even though everybody talked about his durability due to his size. I do think that that's
absolutely.
significant. But I do think it's definitely clickbaity. And until the Panthers win and Bryce scores touchdowns and doesn't turn the ball over, that's just kind of one of the things that he's going to have to deal with. I personally don't think that affects him. I don't think he looks at that stuff or cares about it.
And so
Sorry.
no, no, you're good. Um, from my understanding and from the pictures, he looks like he's a little bit bigger, not like overly muscular or anything like that, but it looks like the health and nutrition program that he's been on, it has filled his frame out a little bit.
Yeah.
We've seen reports of one or two wow throws each training session or each practice session so far in OTAs. What do they mean by that? To be completely fair, like a wow throw with Bryce Young, we know that he doesn't have like the howitzer of an arm that like a Josh Allen or a Pat Mahomes. So his special trait physically is his anticipation and his accuracy. But is he
And
showing a little bit more velocity or drive on any of his throws? Because I think that that's part of what people are looking for when they talk about the footwork going into play and all of those things. Is
that's what
he
I was
going to be
saying.
able to make those tight window throws? Have you seen anything that looks a little bit different?
You mentioned the footwork, and I think that that's where everything starts with
Mm,
the quarterback. I mean, yeah, we see the arm strength, but I think it all starts with the footwork, and that's one of the things that we heard were talked about in those text messages that were released during the
yeah,
athletics, ethering of Frank Reich and his staff last season. But
right.
Canales is focusing in on that, and that's one of the main focal points this early off season or whatnot. But I do think that he has always been capable of making those throws, but like you said, it's anticipation and the receiver actually getting off the, not getting bumped off the route and actually being at the
Yeah,
space that he's supposed to be at. And with the addition of Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen, that's why Adam Thielen was such a heavy target for him, because no matter what, Adam Thielen is getting to the spot. Like, it's
right.
very rare that you see him just bump completely off of his route. He's able to adjust, get to where he's supposed to be, and that's why he was such a safety net for Bryce Young. And as you add more
Absolutely.
receivers like that to where he can be confident that this receiver is going to be where he's throwing the ball, you'll get to see more of those wild throws, because it's a two-way street. It has to be caught by somebody.
Gotcha.
It's not a wild throw unless it's caught.
Yeah, I mean he had some last year, right? Some really nice throws that ended up on the ground. I don't want to point fingers to any
Yeah, so
specific
that's what I
players,
said.
but
Yeah, it's not going to be a wild throw unless it's caught. And I think that
that's
adding
right.
some playmakers, is going to make him look better. But that's
Yeah.
Captain Obvious there. But yeah, that's what I think it is. I don't think that it's like, oh my God, he was never making these throws before. I just think that they're being caught.
Yeah. All right. So one last question for the Panthers, and then I do want you to tell everyone what else you have going on, because you've got some other things that you're covering lately. And I think that at first when you brought it up, I know that it gave Panthers fans a incredible scare and
They're
made
like,
you
oh my
made it think,
God,
yeah, yeah.
I'm
The
scared.
sentiment was that you were just running out of town and you were out of here, and that wasn't going to go over very well. Um, But let me finish with this first. You were on Mac and Bones show, I believe the day after they had me and Two Growls One Roar on to talk about the Panthers, and they asked me on the show. They said, "What is your win prediction for the Panthers this year?" Now, Sheena, if I remember correctly, both you and I had them at like 10 wins last season. Was our prediction?
Man, yeah. Like when I tell you that was so disappointing, like Ricky,
it was bad.
Hiding from I had to hide from the grandpas at the Pop at Aiden's Pop Warner practice because they were telling me the Panthers weren't going to win more than 4 games. And I was like, yes, they are. And then as the season went on, I was over there like incognito with a bucket hat and sunglasses on at the doggone Tepper at the Pop Warner.
It's like I would watch the games on Sundays with a nice tub of like the white makeup and blue makeup and red makeup just so that I could draw that clown
ready
face
to go ahead and paint
while I was
ready to paint it.
Yep.
Like I told him, I said, man, y'all had me on national platforms.
Yeah.
To be fair, they should have.
Yep. I'm with you. Hey, look, I'll ride that wagon until the wheels fall off. Like I that was just a wild, it was like Lemony Snicket's unfortunate events or whatever. Like everything that could have went wrong went wrong.
Everything.
Yep.
I have them at 8. What do you have them at this year?
I had them at 7 or 8, and that's why I wanted to bring this up.
Cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, because it made me nervous because I gave my answer and the guy before me said like 5 or something like that, I think. And everyone else was talking about, can we get over the 4.5, which is where they were marked at the last, like, betnc.com or on DraftKings. And I'm sitting there and I went 7 or 8.
Respectful.
Yeah. And it made me really nervous. But then when I listened to the show the next day and you gave yours at 8, I felt a lot better about it until I started thinking again that both of us had them at 10
last year when we were both wrong. Yep. Listen, one band, one sound, Ricky. I mean, come on now. If you riding with me, we ride together. Was that
what's the point of being a fan, right? If we're gonna say, hey, we're gonna win 4 games, I shouldn't even watch the season then.
I still think that because I still think that this division is so weak. I'm sorry, it's just not the strongest division. Yep. It's not, and it's right there for the Panthers taking. That's why last year was so insanely disappointing. Because even if you weren't going to, get to double digits, they should have at least been in contention within the division. Right. In the state that it was in last season. Now, hopefully this year, the Falcons continue to forget that they have Bijan Robinson on their team and Kyle Pitts. As long as they forget twice this season that they have those 2 monsters on offense, the Panthers might be okay when it comes to them. Even though no matter how good of a season either team is having, they normally split every year.
Almost always, like clockwork.
No matter how good either team or how bad either team is, they always seem to split with the Falcons. So, right. I mean, I just think there's opportunity there, and I could talk all day about that, but that's where my 7 to 8 or 8 to 9 wins comes from, is the fact that they should be able to contend in a division that's not, at its full strength right now.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. All right. So look, you had a live yesterday that I wasn't able to go on and look, but you were talking about Frankie Louvu and Jeremy Chin. And the reason that you were talking about Frankie Louvu and Jeremy Chin is because you're doing a little bit of coverage for the Washington Commanders now. Is that correct?
Well, whenever I can fit it into my schedule. But the reason that I was doing some talking on that live specifically is because having covered them in Carolina, they wanted to know what kind of players they were getting. And both of them, one of the questions was why Chin had a 1 year while Louvu had a 3. Which, you and I know why, based off of how last year and last 2 seasons went, as far as Jeremy Chin kind of being lost in the shuffle of this coaching turnstile or whatnot. So that's really what that was. I covered their draft picks in Vegas in Detroit, because at the beginning of the day, the Panthers didn't have a first round pick.
Right.
But I did need to be in place in case something shook up, which it did, and they drafted up to take Xavier Legette. But I will be filling in every now and again to help out, just because that's where my home station is stationed, with the Ravens, Carolina, and the Commanders. But I'm still in Charlotte.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Well, that is at least reassuring that you're still a Carolina Panthers beat reporter. That's your main thing, and a senior NFL analyst.
I am.
You've been on everything. You've been on the Pat McAfee show. I've seen you on, I believe it was a Brother from Another for Peacock, their sports network, which I think didn't they just get closed down
They did.
Man, that
The show
sucks.
just ended. Yeah, I think they had like a 4-year run, which was awesome because I mean they've
Yeah,
lent a platform to so many people that otherwise would not necessarily be heard.
right.
So shout out to
That
those
was a great
guys.
show. That was a
It
great
was a good
show.
show.
And just to give a little bit of backstory, I should have done this at the very beginning of the episode, but I got really excited to just talk about David Tepper and all that stuff because that's such a fun topic. Um, but I like to try to give a little bit of background on the guests that I have joining me because, like, you're one of the favorite reporters for Carolina Panthers fans. You and Vashti host
Oh,
the Quick Blitz Spaces after the games. You guys had the Quick Blitz podcast last year that you hosted from the 704 shop, which was terrific. Which, by the way, with Frankie Louvu gone, who is going to fill in on the drip or dripping or tripping
man,
for
I
him? Because
don't know
he was the
because you know
barometer.
who else was he was the bar. He was the standard.
Yeah.
Dante Jackson used to serve some looks. He's gone.
Mm. Mm.
I don't know what we're gonna do. Miles Sanders was a repeat winner.
I can tell you who
He
I
has a
don't
very
think it will
interesting
be.
and eclectic style.
I don't think it'll be
Ian,
Chuba.
it could be Ian or Chuba. Those are our repeat offenders.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
are our repeat.
It's a no fly list
Listen,
with those two.
maybe Chuba can maybe Chuba will see or hear this, and you know I think he's coming out with a clothing line, so he might be up in the drip for us. I know when I said he
Mm.
couldn't catch, he took that personal. He got on those
Hey, that
jugs,
was
and
you
last
that
year
was
his hands were
responsible for that?
better. Yes,
Hey,
but
we owe
because
you one.
he had stone hands, and so he was walking out of the locker room on that after that last game. He was like, "I see what the media says." I'm like, "Okay,
And
you were dropping passes.
we see what you do on Sundays. So let's
You're
make
welcome
it
for that
even.
extra. You're extra for. You're welcome for that extra incentive." But you know, he did take that to heart, and he got on those jokes machines. It was an infinitely better catcher. You know,
I
pass
love
catcher
that.
last year. So
Yeah, that's
I mean,
terrific.
if it takes a little bit of nudging with the dripping or tripping, maybe he's coming with it next season.
Yeah. So what do you right now? You're probably watching because it's the lull between NFL action, right? And NBA just finished up. We've got WNBA going on, but you also are a
Yeah.
track and field alum, right? Of Florida State
Yes.
and NC State. Is that correct?
Yep.
And if
Yep. So
I
I'm loving
noticed
it.
just from following you, both of your children, your sons, are also following in those footsteps.
Well, I
And
have three, and they all run track. Even the 8-year-old.
all of them?
The 8-year-old just won his first individual gold medal at AAU districts in the long jump. So they have regionals coming up on Friday and Saturday.
Man, that is impressive. Congratulations. And then your oldest, if I remember, was like just demolishing records. Like, I mean, absolutely
Oh,
like just
that's
obliterating.
Andrew. Yeah, that's Andrew. He's my next to oldest. My oldest is Trey. He's going to Belmont Abbey on track scholarship next year. He just graduated from Ardrey-Kell, and Andrew is going into his senior year at Ardrey-Kell.
Man, you got to be a proud
And
mom.
then I have an 8-year-old. I am. I am. I mean, it's one thing to be a fan of like a team or a professional
Yeah.
athlete, but it's another thing to be a fan of your own kids because you get to see all of the work and the focus, the determination, the discipline, and to see
Yeah.
them, you know, all that stuff come together and come to fruition. It's pretty awesome.
That is great.
It's pretty
And
awesome.
not just that you get to watch them run track, but another thing about you, and will be the last part, and I'll let you go. I apologize for holding you up, but I wanted to give you a little bit of
It's
shine
okay.
on your personal accolades as well.
No, thank
You
you.
post some of the best looking food from a home chef that I have seen just about anybody post. I mean, I'm talking, listen, if you haven't seen Sheena's food that she's posted before, I've seen stuff. I've seen gumbo, I've seen beans and rice, lobster. I think I saw you make Chick-fil-A sandwiches for your kids one time because it was a
Yeah, because it was
Sunday and Chick-fil-A
Sunday.
was
Chick
closed.
Fil A was closed. Yeah, yeah.
Come on, that is
Chick-fil-A
throwing
was
down.
closed.
So you've always cooked, I'm assuming. Is that
Well, to be fair, I have. I've always cooked, you know, and then I have teenage boys, so it's so much cheaper to cook at home. But yeah, I've always cooked because it's kind of like I'll throw my headphones on and be listening to music.
yeah,
Sometimes, honestly, I started recording it because I wouldn't remember what it was that I did differently. Like, I'm like, okay, what did I do differently? That was really good. So I started
yeah,
recording it and I was like, okay, so that I could kind of remember what I did because sometimes I just kind of make stuff up as I go along. So that's
right.
kind of how the food videos came about. I know somebody on Carolina Huddle said they unfollowed me because of because I always post food, and I was just wondering which dish it was that was like the final straw. Was it some cookies? Was it
Yes.
cheesecake? What pissed you off enough to follow me? What food dish
Somebody
was it?
got
I've always
you
been
out
curious.
of their followers because of your food?
I know. I thought it was hilarious.
That seems so
It was the
backwards to
funniest
me.
thing. The only thing I wanted to know was what dish offended them to that extent.
Yeah.
I just want to know which one it was. I'm still gonna post food. I just wonder because that's just hilarious to me. It's
Yeah,
actually
you
really
just
funny.
gotta know, like, which one of these incredibly, like, appealing pictures of food was the one that pissed
Which
you off and said,
picture
"Hey, I gotta get out of
pissed
here."
you off? Get her out of here.
That's
I don't know what food
crazy.
it was that got me out the paint. Something got me out the paint, Ricky. I don't know what it was, but that was funny. I was like,
Well,
that is
just know everyone
hilarious.
else is here and riding for those food picks. You keep that coming because honestly, I can sit there and look at that and it gives me inspiration on what the hell am I going to cook. You know, I'm like, look at that. I'm not
What
going
you
to be
gonna
able to
cook?
make that,
So
but
what
I
I
can
was
definitely try.
what I was doing was like I'm starting a series where I did like tacos and tight ends. So I'm gonna go position by position, just with different meals. I need to ask Twitter what they want me to post next because I need to talk about the running backs. That's what's next up, either running backs or wideouts. And
Well,
eventually
let's
we'll
put
get
up
to the
your.
offensive line with the pancakes and pancake blocks. I think I'm gonna just kind of use that parallel.
Oh, I like that. Yeah,
So
that's a
we'll
good
see.
one. Well, here's your social media accounts for everyone to follow. If you have anything else though that you would like to plug that you are on, whether it's radio shows, TV shows, spots, guest spots, or anything like that, now is a perfect time to let people know where to find you.
Well, I have a little bit of break, but things will probably pick up the week before training camp because everybody wants to know what the training camp predictions are. But I tweet daily, so you guys can find me over there.
There you go. Look, Sheena, thank you very much for coming on here. I appreciate it. I know
Of
that
course.
listeners will appreciate it very much. I look forward to the season. I look forward to our predictions finally coming correct this year. 8 wins. I think that when that
Listen, if
happens,
not, I'll bring the paint.
okay,
I'll
that's
bring the
fair.
paint
But
this time.
if they get the 8 wins, then you let me know what kind of champagne or wine or whatever it is that we're going to pop and
We're
open up
popping.
because
We're popping bottles. It's been a
popping
long time
something.
coming. We're popping
Well,
something.
I'll celebrate.
Something's
I'll
getting
celebrate a
popped.
game under 500. As backwards as that sounds, I'll celebrate it.
Listen, this is a marathon. Clearly, definitely not a
That's right.
sprint.
That's right. All right. Sheena, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheena Quick. Man, that was awesome. I really appreciate her coming on here and giving us that time. Um, we'll go ahead and we'll wrap this episode up because honestly, I was going to try to talk about some other stuff, but I think that Sheena literally let me ask her every single question that I had in the bank and gave us a detailed answer. So we'll hold off. We'll talk about training camp again once we get a little bit closer to it. It will be down. The Fan Fest is down at Clemson this year. I know a lot of people are excited about that. And everything else is at Bank of America Stadium at the practice fields. So we'll touch base again here in another episode here in about a week or two. But until then, I am your host of the Bow Body Show, Ricky Rains. We'll see you guys next time.